Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. Last week, I spoke to Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I wanted to ask her about the state of the presidential race here in the United States, but also about what is happening now in Venezuela. But I did start with getting her reaction to Biden's decision 2 weeks ago to drop out of the race.
My first reaction, because I have supported Joe Biden since the first presidential election I could cast a vote in 1988, was some heartbreak. Especially because he is really such a good man, such an incredible leader, and he'll go down, and his legacy will go down as really one of the greatest presidents, and certainly the most accomplished president in modern times. But at the same time, really incredible admiration and pride that we have a president, and he is a man and an American who is selfless enough to step back from the most powerful position in the world and put country over self and country over party. And the Joe Biden that I know didn't surprise me when he made that decision.
Now, I realize he said it wasn't because of any mental acuity issues, that he stepped aside because he wanted to unite the party and it was becoming a distraction. But we have all seen, I think it's hard to argue that he is not the same that he was 4 years ago. I can make the joke, none of us are. But do you have any concerns about him continuing and finishing the final 6 months of his term in office?
Not a shred of concern. And I think we're certainly past the issue of whether or not he should or shouldn't run. Kamala Harris is our presumptive nominee for the Democratic Party, and Joe Biden continues to do a really incredible job as our president of the United States of America. And I have had an opportunity. I can just speak firsthand instead of just spouting off, some random opinion. I've spoken with President Biden 2 or 3 times, either in person or by phone, in the last, let's say, 2 months. And so I'm very confident in his full capability to run our country, and I've seen him with the hand fully on the tiller and steering our ship of state.
Now, obviously, we can say that Vice President Kamala Harris is the presumptive nominee at this point. It's pretty clear she's going to have the delegates. There really is no challenger. Why do you believe there is so much energy surrounding her, her suddenly now leading the ticket? I mean, I have to be honest with you, Congresswoman. It looked to me as if Democrats were in deep doldrums and you were headed for a major loss in November. What's changed with Harris now at the top of the ticket?
There is really excitement, the likes of which I've never seen, particularly because it is burning intensely and brightly in a very short burst of time. I think part of it is that we know we have less than 100 days until the election. So this is going to be a sprint with high stakes. And the excitement is also attributable to the admiration and commitment and reach that Kamala Harris has across the breadth of our country. I mean, she is uniting women and cat ladies and white dudes and black men, black women, Hispanic men, Hispanic women, people who are pet owners. It's really remarkable. There's a yearning for the torch to have been passed to the next generation, and the contrast. I think people are so gravely concerned about the deep, dark, really terror-inducing prospect of Donald Trump becoming president again, and to have this kind of hope and this reinvigoration of our momentum is really remarkable and fantastic.
Obviously, she has issues as well that she's going to have to address related to, because I think some of the same issues that Joe Biden was facing in terms of being held accountable as to whether or not enough was done on the border, enough is being done when it comes to issues like economic issues.
Well, you have only to look at her prosecution of the case when she had her rally in Atlanta this past week, where she laid out very clearly, and also the first substantive ad that she released, which was taking the immigration issue head on and taking it right to Donald Trump's doorstep, because the blame for the fact that we did not make sure that the most significant compromise on immigration reform that we could have had became law was because Donald Trump ordered his acolytes in the Congress, his MAGA extremists, to kill it and not support it, even though there was bipartisan support for it in the Senate, because he wanted to use it as an election issue.
How concerned are you that this election is going to turn to both the issue of race and gender, in the idea that you've heard some of your colleagues on the Republican side in the House refer to Kamala Harris as a DEI choice? Donald Trump this week, at the National Association of Black Journalists, questioned whether or not Kamala Harris is even black, or did she just recently turn black?
Well, Donald Trump clearly is applying very quickly the MAGA extremist smelling salts to wake people up to just how extreme and horrendous and weird, frankly, his entire tenure as president was. Don't forget the anti-Semitism. We've got quite a sprinkle, a dollop of anti-Semitism when he not only questions the sanity of Jews for supporting the Democratic Party as significantly as we do, and how any Jewish person could vote for a Democratic candidate, but he had the audacity this week to suggest that Kamala Harris, who is married to the second gentleman who is Jewish, that somehow Kamala Harris doesn't like Jews. Frankly, as someone who's been Jewish my whole life, and every member of my family is Jewish, I would be hard pressed to take Donald Trump's advice on, and frankly, my Jewish constituents feel the same, on who he thinks is the best judge of a candidate and whether they have our back and share our values.
I want to turn to Venezuela for a second, because I know it's an issue that is critically important here in South Florida. I know your district has a large number of Venezuelans who reside there as well. What do you believe? First off, let's be clear. Do you believe that Maduro was appropriately reelected? Do you believe there was widespread fraud? And if you believe that, what can the United States and the world community do about it?
Maduro is a fraud and is someone who clearly never intended to actually conduct a legitimate election and was not legitimately elected the other day. It's quite obvious. Thankfully, the opposition was organized, and you have an opposition coalition that quite frankly, the Biden-Harris administration worked closely with to formulate the Barbados agreements that led to this election. And as deeply disturbing as it is that that Maduro basically is trying to usurp power and declare himself the winner fraudulently, at least we had an agreement that Maduro and the opposition signed, led to an election in which the opposition was able to get about, I think it's about 60 to 70% of the tabulations from the voting centers that has them with the evidence that Maduro lost overwhelmingly. And thankfully, because there was a carrot and stick approach taken by the Biden-Harris administration with the approach to trying to get to the July 28th election, now we have the opportunity to rally the world and our allies who have, even in the region, like Lula and Petro, who aren't normally so great on these things, who've come to the side of the Venezuelan people and said that Maduro must release the precinct by precinct tabulations and prove the results of this election.
How do you see this playing out, though? Because it doesn't seem to me that Maduro is someone who will either concede to providing that sort of evidence of his own corruption, or is likely to step aside even with international pressure.
Although the Supreme Court in Venezuela is in his pocket as well, he is clearly feeling the pressure from the EU, from the G7, from the OAS countries, from leaders who are normally allies like Petro and Lula in Colombia and Brazil. And so he is clearly feeling the pressure, and that's why he's trying to take some steps to continue to pretend that the election was legitimate. And I think that pressure, it's critical that we continue to ratchet up that pressure. We need to pass My Voice Act, which Republicans unfortunately did not take up before we went into recess. And that would ensure that we put sanctions into law that can give more tools to the Biden-Harris administration to hold Maduro accountable and continue to make it very difficult for him to stay in power. We need a transition from Maduro's authoritarian rule to the declaration of the real winner, which was the opposition, the opposition coalition, and Edmundo Gonzalez, so that we can make sure that we have a democratic transition in Venezuela, and we can have relief in that region, because there are countries around Venezuela that, like Colombia and others, that have absorbed millions of their migrants, and as has the United States. And we need to help Venezuelans get back to the vibrant democracy that they once were.
We will continue the conversation about Venezuela after the break with the director of Caracas Chronicles, Raul Stoke. Stay with us. Welcome back. It's easy for many of us to see what is happening in Venezuela and tune out, to think it has no real effect on us here. But you would be wrong. It does matter. Not just because more than 200,000 Venezuelans are our neighbors here in South Florida, but also because what is happening there is just plain wrong. The people of Venezuela went to the polls last week, and according to both the press and international observers, the people voted overwhelmingly to get rid of Nicolas Maduro. On Thursday, the United States officially recognized the opposition candidate, Edmundo Gonzalez, won the election. Yet Maduro discarded the results and declared himself the victor. Late last week, I spoke to Raul Stoke, a director at the well-respected website Caracas Chronicles. There's been violence. There's been people have been imprisoned. I know in talking to folks, from Venezuela who are here, who have family there, they are heartbroken and devastated by they put so much hope into this year's round of election only to have it crushed. What's taking place on the streets in Venezuela now as we speak?
Again, it was a landslide win by González Urrutia. They have the means to prove that because they have like the voting tallies that are issued when you close a voting center, and that are given to voting witnesses that sign the tallies, and they get a copy of those. So what the opposition did was they uploaded all those tallies to a website, and there you can see like the results with proof.
But what's happening on the streets right now in terms of the violence and the arrests?
To take you to the streets, it's important to see like the difference is almost 70-30. 70% González Urrutia and almost 30 Maduro. So it's a landslide win. It's the first time that Chavismo gets such a strong show of force against them. So obviously, like the next morning, Caracas was dead. You couldn't see that there wasn't cars in the street. There was nothing. As the day progressed, you started hearing like people, the classic cacerolazo, which is that they beat on pots and pans as a sign of protest, and those were stronger, like in more popular low-income areas. And like by noon, people started going out to protest, and they were like very, they were like straight. They weren't like very small gatherings. It started and it caught fire really quickly. They even there were even protests in front of the government palace, which is something that hadn't happened in years because we know that Chavista government violence is very significant and strong, and protests started erupting everywhere. They started taking down Hugo Chavez statues. At least 6 on the first day were beheaded, and there were videos like of people dragging the head of Chavez in motorbikes in the streets, and there was like a significant amount of chaos. I think that on the first day, those protests took the government off guard, especially on the places that they were taking place, and second, the strength of those protests. So on the first day, there was like some repression, but not a lot. But by yesterday, not there were several reports of people being shot. At least I think that they were like 12 confirmed people that were killed by either government forces, government security forces, or these armed groups that support the government.
I guess a lot of this will depend ultimately on where the military stands in terms of whether or not the military will continue to support Maduro, or whether or not they think the international pressure and everything that's being brought to bear on Venezuela makes it better for Maduro to leave. Is that a fair assessment, or is that too simple an understanding?
The sense in Venezuela, and because it always has been a little bit like that, and it always comes down to that, is that the military have the final word. Chavismo itself, the precedent is that they don't go back on their narratives. If they say they won, right now you see Colombia, Brazil, especially Brazil, Mexico, and the U.S. Pressuring for Maduro to show the results. Like the ideal outcome of that would be to say, "Oh yeah, we made a mistake, and Edmundo won," and that's not going to happen.
Is that likely?
No. They never go back on their narratives. In the end, the hopes of some people are in the fact that the armed forces are going to turn and say, okay, we're not going to let this stand anymore. The thing is that the armed forces are very much Chavista. And they have, while in the past, they have helped in when the opposition has won elections. They have been kind of, they have pressured the government to say, the opposition won. Here, they already didn't do that, and I don't see very likely that there's gonna be like a coup or something like that, because that's where we would be standing. The rumors in the street regarding the military, let me just add this, is that Padrino, who is the Minister of Defense, is getting a lot of pressure from mid-ranking officers, that they're getting pressure of the troops, that they're not happy with what they're doing because they're Venezuelans, they have family, if you do the numbers, it's not 70%, but maybe 80% of Venezuelans hate Chavismo. So he must be getting a fair amount of pressure, but that doesn't mean that there's going to be either a break in the military or a break in the Chavista coalition where the military is going to say, no, we just got to get these things in order.
How devastating is this for Venezuelans to come this far, to put so much hope or faith, at least, in this election, only to be seeing it stolen from them and the repression intensify now against them? What is your impression of how the Venezuelan people are coping with this, and dealing with this? Because the ones I've spoken to here in Miami are just gutted by it. They're devastated. They're emotional. I talked to one woman who was almost in tears. as she was talking about, the sense of hopelessness in some ways about all of this.
Yeah. Well, it's clearly demoralizing, but I think that most people kind of expected this outcome of the election day. The question is whether how is this going to end? So it's not so much as everything ended with Chavismo still in the election, but actually everything starts with Chavismo still in the election. Because I think that most people expected that the opposition was going to win, and most people expected that they were going to try to steal it. The thing is whether something can be done. So I always, in these conversations, I go back to what is different this time. Because for many, it's like deja vu. We've been here several times before. Sorry. So what is different right now is, first, the opposition actually has the evidence of the win. And second is a landslide. And the fact that you can prove that the vote was such, not only to prove to the international community that Venezuelans are against the regime, or that the Venezuelans voted for Edmundo, but for the people in Venezuela to know that they're not alone, that the person next to them is not someone who they have to watch their mouths because they're gonna just tell on them because they're from the opposition or anything. There is certainty that most likely the people around you, feel the same way that you do. And it's something that Chavismo hasn't exactly dealt before, because they have been dealing with a polarized country for many years, where whether at some point it tilted toward the opposition, it was almost like equal forces.
What do you think happens at the end of the day?
As I said, this doesn't end with the elections. It's just starting. I think that the fact that it's so many people wanting them to leave, and Venezuelans realizing that it's so many people wanting them to leave, could be the start of something that can take, of a process that can take some time. I mean, this is not something that's going to be resolved in a week. Obviously, it would be ideal, but definitely, I think it's not. It's not. We're not going to see the end of it either in a week. I think that this is, there's a likelihood that this is the beginning of the end, but it's very hard to determine a timeline for that.
We'll be right back after the break. If you have any thoughts or comments, feel free to contact me at jdefede@cbs.com. I do enjoy hearing from you. Well, that's all the time we have. We'll be back again next week. Thanks again for watching. Enjoy the rest of your day.